everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey Podcast. That's me nosing my glass of whiskey, by the way. I am joined today, and as always, by my good friend, my business partner, the dear Mr. Jason Neal, Patrick Harris Johnston Yellen.
Hello.
Hello yourself. Your handsome self.
I am present and accounted for.
So when you get into class and the teacher comes in and they start calling your name,
indeed,
would you raise your hand and you say present, or was there a different Scottish reaction like you weak?
No. Yeah, we were just a series of smart arses, and so you would say things like attending.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here was always a lowest common denominator. Here.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know if you ever did this. This is a bit naughty. Any kids listening, hashtag please drink the whole bottle responsibly. But we would sometimes switch off with a partner, and you would have that person say here to your name, and you would say here to their name, and it was a coordinated effort to annoy the shit out of the teacher.
Oh wow! Would you ever have a girl to say here for your name and vice versa to really screw them up?
To be clear, we did not talk to girls at that age.
You didn't talk to girls?
To be clear.
All right. To be clear.
Not at that age. Oh my gosh.
What age are we talking about? You didn't talk to girls.
18. 22.
All right, that checks out. Well,
anyway,
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here with a little whiskey in my glass. This is a whiskey we're going to be talking about come the news segment, which will be after our conversation with the lovely Dr. Pat Heist of Wilderness Trail.
Yeah, it was a good chat. Good nerdy chat.
Yeah, it's. I feel like people are going to need to put on their glasses, and they're going to need a pen, piece of paper. They're going to need to yell present, because this is going to be like a masterclass in yeast and bacteria and fermentation.
Yeah, after a while it starts to sound like a trip to the doctors. He will talk about dipping his long beard in casks. Mm-hmm. It's yeah. There was a lot to learn in that interview. That was good. He was a good sport, though. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then again, spoiler alert, by the end of the interview where he talks about a part 2, I always like those types of conversations where, that was me meeting him for the first time, talking with him for the first time, nerding out with him for the first time. And it did not feel like the first time we were having a chat about anything. Yeah. And B, knowing by the conclusion that we were just scratching the surface on places we want to take the conversation. And
it's interesting. It's just that, right? The entire time it felt as if we were scratching the surface. But when I look at the audio files in my audio editing tool, my GarageBands, and I look at his WAV files versus our WAV files, despite us only scratching the surface with him, he talked like 700 times more than we did. Just like
it was good,
right? It's kind of like those Sukhinder Singh or Dr. Bill Lumsden conversations where you say, "What color is the sky?" and then they just go off.
It's a meditation on historical bottling, blending practices. Yeah, no, I always feel that way for our listeners. Like, they get to listen to these two jamokes plenty. And the reason we bring in a guest is to bring in another voice, bring in another perspective, bring in another area of expertise. And so, when you hand the floor over and you get an education, that's worth the price of admission.
Right. Yeah.
No refunds on this episode.
Not a one. But, interestingly, I would argue that the email that you're about to read is of a similar geeky level to the conversation our listeners are about to hear.
And funnily enough, it comes from the one and only Dr. James Foster.
From one doctor to the other. Look at this. My son, the doctor.
So, as always, the date when this came in was a while ago. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason that we've been sitting on it before bringing it to the podcast, and I will explain in just a moment. So Dr. James Foster on June 27th, as you pointed out, Joshua, on my birthday.
Your birthday.
Thanks be to James Foster. I just finished the latest padcost. Congratulations on another excellent episode. For those keeping score at home, June 27 was the day after our Daniel Whittington episode. However, Foster is referring to our Balcones episode.
Indeed he is.
So my guess is he was probably formulating this email when we dropped another episode on him. So Foster writes, at one point, Gabe explained that they, Balcones, reduced the fill ABV in order to slow down the interactions of the spirit with Texas heat. Mm-hmm. He described that this reduced the angel share by slowing down the rate at which liquid flows from the inside of the cask to the outside. My head exploded, parentheses, making a very tiny...
Says the guy with a PhD. Continue.
James is easily the smartest guy I've ever met. I get that casks breathe. Could you put some leaves on that branch?
Oh, look at that.
Is it osmotic pressure? What role does temperature play? If I put Balcones new make at their fill strength into an M&H or Paul John cask in Israel or India, would it behave like it does in Texas? Mm-hmm. What role does pore size play? I could go on and on. Joshua frequently asks about fill ABV during interviews.
I do.
And I always filed that away as just another bit of geek trivia. But now I know it really friggin' matters. Thanks for everything, James. Very quickly on that very point, Pat Heist mentions the entry strength on Wilderness Trail in today's interview.
Which is quite a bit lower than the current...
Say no more.
Okay.
Say no more.
Let me ask you a question, because I read through this email multiple times, and he asks the question, is it osmotic pressure?
Yeah.
And I assume that has something to do with Ozzy Osbourne. Am I...
Oh my God! When will I learn? I am Charlie Brown with the football. I 100%. I pushed my glasses up on the bridge of my nose there.
You got already.
I was thinking he is about to ask me what osmotic pressure is, and all I can think of is a semi-permeable membrane. And how will I pull this off when he asks me this? Nope, he pulled away the football right as I was about to kick it.
You are welcome.
Oh my God. Dear listener, I am literally staring at my ceiling right now. Oh, my Lord.
You got to take the mirrors off the ceiling. Anyway, continue. What?
But then what will I do with this mechanical bull?
Oh, God, I haven't even taken a sip of this whiskey, and I'm having the best time ever. Okay.
So the other part of the preamble here is... getting this series of questions from Foster, my initial reaction is fucked if I know, right?
Yeah, right.
And so one of the positions we've always tried to take with the podcast is we talk to people who know more than us, which we could probably find a random person in the street and fulfill that prophecy. But I thought it was smart to put this in front of the very people who had inspired the question. Yeah. So I dropped a note to Emma Crandall and Gabrielle Richard at Balcones, who were the subjects of our Balcones episode. And I said, please take a look over this. I said a little bit more than that, but the essence is, please take a look over this and let me know if there's anything you'd like to share.
Yeah.
And so Gabriel did share. So push your glasses up on the bridge of your nose, Joshua.
Go.
So here's the opening word from a professional who deals in this stuff day in and day out. He goes, woof.
Woof. That's great.
WHUF, which I really like. Woof. And then, because he's a classy guy, period. No I also have not had a drop of whiskey. No exclamation point in sight.
Okay.
A period. A full stop if you are listening in the Commonwealth. Lots to unpack here, but at its simplest, we can return to the ideal gas law. PV equals NRT.
Jesus Christ. Oh, gosh.
So good. So good. So good.
Did you hold on? There's my head exploding.
At its simplest, we can return to PV equals NRT.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go, everybody. And there you have it.
I think when he uses simplest, I think he's meaning at its most reduced point of understanding, right? Not simple as maybe we
as
understand
for laymen. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the listeners have got PV equals NRT in their back pockets, right?
Are you down with NRT?
You know me. You take the PV from the bottom and you bring it to the top. We're just cancelling out mathematical equations now.
Hey. All right.
You increase temperature, which Texas tends to do, like a lot. Then you increase pressure. Increased vapor pressure in the barrel helps to push and drive spirit deeper into the staves in the Texas climate.
Checks out.
Well past your standard Kentucky char layer, interacting with deep oak layers and pulling quantities of extractives that Scotch whiskey and Kentucky Tennessee whiskey can only dream about. I love the fact that in an uber nerdy opening paragraph, Gabriel throws down the gauntlet to the rest of the world.
Yeah, right? What you got? Come at me, bro. It's basically what he said.
Yeah, you see your Kentucky char layer? I can only see that in my rear view mirror. So he goes on. This is tremendous. Some oak flavor extractives are more water soluble, tannin, wood sugar, while others are more alcohol soluble, vanillin, glycol, lactones, eugenol.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of these you'll hear getting mentioned, Pat Heist, today.
Yep.
We drop proof when marrying or by having a lower entry proof for new make because we know the Texas climate is going to force our whiskey into parts of the oak where it will pick up a lot of the alcohol-soluble elements. Too much of these, and the whiskey can feel too textural, spicy, unbalanced, earthy. By dropping proof, we make sure the spirit slightly prefers wood sugar, body, mouth-filling, sweetness, over the other alcohol-soluble character. In-house, we might say, quote, let's soften this whiskey up by performing an in-barrel dilution, end quote. Or by marrying a variety of casks together, proofing them from their cask strength down to 55 or 57 or 55 to 57%, and putting them back in barrel to soften up and mellow.
Okay.
A real nice bit of information there, and really nice bit of science being used.
And echoes a little bit some of the messaging we've gotten from our friends at Westland when they talk about putting their whiskey into finishing casks. If they finish their whiskey, they will lower that ABV down a little bit to go after certain flavors. So now it's like it's being reinforced here, right? What they're saying is being reinforced here.
Well, and it's like Pat says in today's interview, you can go down the path of tradition where you know the ways to get certain flavors, or you can pinpoint actions using science.
Yep.
And here you've got Balcones knowing the science and knowing exactly how to pinpoint that, and removing some of the inexact quote unquote science.
Yep.
So one more lengthy paragraph here, but it's such good material here. Eventually, the results of our climate study will be more widely available, where we aged the same whiskey in the quote unquote same barrels in 5 different locations in North America, plus 1 site in Scotland. This study conclusively proved that the climate overpowers the barrel impact on matured spirit. So yes, the exact same distillate into the quote-unquote same barrels will produce different spirits if aged in Israel, India, Texas, etc. We're still unpacking what all of these climatic distinctions and contributions are. The short of it is that the hotter a climate is, with more diurnal temperature shifts of 20 plus or 30 plus, the more alcohol-soluble compounds you will pull from the oak, where the gentler climates prefer the water-soluble compounds. We believe this is mainly due to the depth of penetration of the spirit into the stave in the hotter climates, and quote-unquote cycling or movement within these deep layers, and only indirectly related to proof of the spirit in cask.
Wow.
And he concludes, that's enough for now. Happy to do an episode related just to this study once we get things rolling.
That's wild. That's wild. I don't take any of our relationships or industry relationships for granted, and it's just so lovely that you can forward this on to to an expert, and it's like, yeah, oh, here you go, here it is, X, Y, and Z, and we're able to get the proper answer. So,
and here's a thing that we're exploring as a company that James is sitting pondering in his intelligent brain. A lot to unpack in there, and I really hope this sets the table for Gabriel coming on it. And when I wrote him back, I said, listen, just give us the date. Just send us a date. Yeah. Give us a date, and we will absolutely have an episode dedicated to this climate study. So, yeah, isn't that brilliant? Gosh, that's so good. The water-soluble and the alcohol-soluble and what you get from either of them, then connected to climate, connected to diurnal temperature swings. Beautiful. Really beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can throw all of that knowledge out there. Meanwhile, magic is still happening in the cask. Variables that are uncontrollable, despite as much control as we want to put on it. Magic can happen. Inconsistencies can happen, and then you start an independent bottling company that highlights those inconsistencies.
And that's exactly where I was going to go with your comment there. It's not so much magic to me is just something you see with your eyes that you can't on your own explain. Perhaps taste with your taste buds that you can't otherwise explain.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean there's not an explanation for it.
Exactly, yeah.
What really strikes me are the inconsistencies. Even when you do know what is happening in there, you go, either that didn't work the way it was anticipated, or that worked in an even better way than we anticipated. It's those inconsistencies and obviously conversations we've had with distillery managers about, well, sister casks are all, quote unquote, back to Gabriel, the same. Yeah. It's like, no, none of them are the same. Yeah. None of them. Yeah. So sincere thanks to Foster for writing in and spurring that exchange of emails. Thank you to Emma and for Gabriel for receiving that email and for writing back, and hopefully setting the stage for a future episode where we get to unpack. So, yeah, great to have Balcones back on in the comments section here.
Well, let's keep riding this whiskey geek train straight into our conversation with Dr. Pat Heist, and then we'll come out of that conversation. We've got a bit of news to share. Some tasting notes to share. I'm absolutely desperate to be sipping on this whiskey.
I've been reading this whole time. I haven't tasted a damn thing.
So here it is, our conversation with Dr. Pat Heist of Wilderness Trail Distillery and Firm Solutions. Well, Dr. Pat Heist, thank you so much for joining me and Jason on this podcast. Wilderness Trail has been a distillery we got familiar with back in February of 2020, like right before the world shut down. We were at Charlie Prince's place. I'm wearing my Drammers shirt now. And we were doing a live podcast with him. And right before we got on, Bill Thomas of Jack Rose was in the room. And he had, I want to say, 6, 7, 8, 12, 15. I don't know how 30. Yeah. I don't know how many, bottlings of Wilderness Trail, but really a lot to share, and it showed just a wide variety of flavors. So that was our first entree into it, and that got us nice and lubricated to record the podcast in a really happy manner. But that was now a bit over 4 years ago. And since then, just recently, we've thankfully we've bottled our own Wilderness Trail, which we're really proud of and excited to have that connection between yourself and us. And I realize, there's a good proportion of our listenership are really single malt focused. We have a lot of single malt listeners who may not be familiar with Wilderness Trail or the full story. So I wonder if we can just rewind the clock a little bit and talk to us about your beginnings, which, as I understand, start with Firm Solutions, more with, fermentation before distillation. So could we rewind the clock and talk about your beginnings?
Yeah, absolutely. I've probably got one of the most twisted paths to get into outside of being born in Kentucky. Some people are destined to be into bourbon if just simply you're born in Kentucky. But, I really, my first, getting into college, first of all, my first real passion that I identified was microbiology. I actually started off in pre-medicine for no good reason outside of I just thought that's what you did as a scientist. What are your options in college? You become a veterinarian, a pharmacist, a doctor, or a dentist. What else is there? So I started off in pre-med, and once I took microbiology, I was like, man, I really love this subject, and I switched my whole focus to microbiology, got a degree in microbiology, kind of as a result of a summer job that I took, ended up in the Department of Plant Pathology, which is also the study of how microorganisms cause diseases of plants. And so I became an expert in how different microorganisms affect field crops in Kentucky. So we did a lot of work with tobacco farmers, vegetable crops, but also corn and wheat and other grain crops grown in the state, as well as turf grasses. I did a lot of work on golf course greens and different things like that. What kind of fungicide you put on a fairway versus a green, depending on what kind of disease you're treating. And then very oddly, after I got a master's and a PhD in plant pathology, I went from working for agricultural extension at the University of Kentucky, again, working directly with farmers in the state, helping them solve problems, to I got a job as a medical microbiology professor at a medical school in eastern Kentucky. So I went from plants to human medicine and human microbiology, which really focuses a lot on bugs and drugs. You know, if you're got strep throat, what type of drug would you use to treat that versus if you got athlete's foot or, you know, you name the disease, there's different ways of treating it. So I got a lot of experience there. In eastern Kentucky, there's a lot of moonshine exchanging hands, and you couldn't help but to kind of be aware of the whole, you know, liquor culture and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of this is very homegrown. So that's about the time that I started really looking at it. And prior to any, you know, during my graduate school days, I became friends with my current business partner, Shane Baker. He was the guitar player in my band, or in our band, I'll say, just like in our businesses. But anyhow, I was communicating with him, and we were kind of trying to get our foot in the door in the liquor business and kind of using Shane's mechanical engineering background. He's also got a very robust background in business. He was in venture capital, and we kept in touch. Even though I moved away to be a microbiology professor, the band kind of fizzled out a little bit, but we stayed in touch. And we started a company called Firm Solutions, Firm as in fermentation. We started that company back in 2006 while I was a professor at the medical school in Pikeville. And Firm Solutions services distilleries and breweries and currently, you know, hard seltzer producers. And when we look at distilleries, we're talking about whiskey. You know, just looking at whiskey here in the United States, we've got single malt, we've got, you know, bourbons and rye whiskeys, we've got Scotch and Irish whiskeys in other countries. We've got Canadian whiskeys, and they're all made in different ways using different processes. Then you have rum and tequila and all kinds of other different, you know, poitín over in Ireland, and there's all kinds of little hole-in-the-wall spirits that you see here and there. So we specialize in helping people, you know, perform these fermentations, and depending on what you're fermenting, if it's sugar or molasses, you're going to have a different strategy for fermenting that versus if you're doing a grain-based fermentation where you have conversion of starch to fermentable sugars. You're always going to have a lot of potential for microbial contamination. So that's kind of where my background in microbiology comes in handy. You know, Shane, where he's a mechanical engineer, he knows how to build a factory, and he thinks about everything that, you know, how are all those valves working and how are things able to be cleaned relative to. So we put our skill set together. And, you know, I've said this a million times in different podcasts and in interviews and things. But to be successful as a yeast supplier, you got to be ready to get the phone call of, hey, man, your damn yeast isn't working. So, you know, when we get the phone call of, you know, anytime the fermenter's not bubbling right, the first person that the distillery or the brewery thinks about is the yeast provider. So we get the call, hey, your yeast isn't working. Then we got to go in there and figure out what's the real problem here, because we've got a tight handle on quality of our product. So, you know, is this something simple like a temperature issue? Is it something more complicated like a bacterial contamination issue that we're going to have to step in with some, you know, some labs testing and some different things to solve? Is this a biochemistry issue relative to converting starch into fermentable sugars? You know, are they cooking at the right temperatures? Including, you can't cook too high because you've got enzymes that can be destroyed. You can't cook too low or those enzymes don't work properly. And that's the whole, you know, the process of biochemically converting starch into fermentable sugars. So the list goes on of the 500 things that can cause problems at distilleries and breweries. But when you look at how, you know, bourbon is made and rye whiskey here in the United States, we have grain on fermentations. The grain is all left in there throughout fermentation and distillation, as opposed to Scotch where you have, or beer where you're lautering and you're making a clear wort. You're taking away a lot of that protein and fiber. which lends to a lot of metabolism in fermentation that you don't get whenever you take that stuff out of there. So many different things to consider. And we had the advantage leading up to Wilderness Trail of being in many of the world's most famous distilleries, helping them solve problems. We supply yeast to a lot of the big distilleries. And so we had the advantage prior to starting our distillery of not only having a company that can shell out some capital to support a distillery, but also the know-how, which has never existed in the history of mankind, of being able to go in hundreds of other distilleries, not only on the tour here in the 51% corn and the new charred oak barrel bit, but also what does it look like underneath that fermenter? How does that agitator blade work? What are the RPMs there? What's the viscosity of that mash, et cetera, going down the line. And we're the ones that distilleries and breweries call when they have serious contamination issues. So we're studying not only the yeast strains that are used throughout all those industries, but also the contaminating organisms that either have evolved at these distilleries over time or ones that just show up that need to be, there's problem solving that needs to occur. So we retain those organisms, we study those organisms, and if you really want to crack the flavor code on old whiskeys, you've really got to look beyond what is told about the recipe, which is the mash bill, the yeast strain, the process. Well, what about these 9 organisms that are showing up at all these different populations at any given time? Those are also things that need to be considered, and it's kind of like the new frontier of understanding for this industry, and I feel like we're at the forefront of that.
Okay, that was a lot, and I see Jason probably has 700 questions. Feel free to hop in, Jason. I have a question, but
yeah, go for it. Keep going.
Well, man, there really is so much to dig into here. But as you were talking, one of the questions that kept popping up in my mind was about those who might reach out to you for guidance on yeast. And I'm curious, when people reach out to you, are they looking for yield? Are they looking for flavor? Are they looking for a combination of the two? And how do you address the requests that they're looking for to satisfy the goal that they're trying to attain?
Yeah. So, the first thing is what do you got in mind for me here? Sometimes it's, hey, I have this jar that my great grandfather left behind and it was whiskey that he made, and I want to recreate this whiskey and I want to know what yeast strain it was. Okay. So, requests like that, a lot of times they believe that, if I can just find the yeast strain, then I'm going to be able to recreate this. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Let's look and try to figure out what the heck is the mash recipe. Yeah. And those things can be told a lot of times just by tasting. Is this a sour mash or a sweet mash? Mm-hmm. A lot of great grandpa's recipes, even if they wanted to use sour mash, they wouldn't have had a batch left around previously to, you know what I'm saying? So just recycling of liquid as you do on a day-to-day basis when you're distilling throughout the course of a normal day, not running 24/7. So you get the request and, you just have to be helpful because a lot of people don't realize that it's not just the yeast. You've got, like I said, you got the grain recipe, you've got sweet mash versus sour mash considerations. You've got some other things to consider: pot still, column still,
sure.
Temperature off the still. I mean, we've been able to transfer from a pot still distillery to a column still distillery and did the transition pretty seamlessly. You can go back to our pot distilled product and you can find, especially given the fact, and we did this out of confidence, all of our wheated bourbon for the first 2 or 3 years was all released as single barrel bottle in bond. So we were, hey man, whatever differences there are here, we're happy to let you guys see those. And then in the case of our rye whiskey, it was all 100% single barrel strength. And then we started actually realizing that, you can't just have a single barrel strength, because most people want, something that's less priced or whatever. And so, we started getting, we started off literally wanting to do exactly what we believed other whiskey people wanted to do. And then little by little, you start, there are things that you have to do in business that, just make more sense, bottle design even. It's like, why does everybody have the same old boring bottle? We see that now because this kind of bottle does not work well on a bottling line. And 3 different labels, 1, 2, 3. I mean, this is a tapered bottle. We have Wilderness Trail pad printed on the front of the bottle. I mean, we literally have one person at the distillery whose job it is to make sure these bottles go in exactly the same way. So, when you start off not knowing a lot about marketing or about things like that, you start getting more ergonomic with your design. But anyway, back to your question about, another request we get a lot of times is, hey, I'm going to build a distillery in this location. Can you guys come in and find the old yeast that used to be here? It's like, well, we can find the yeast that's there now. We can't really guarantee without having the yeast that used to be there. But sometimes we can go in, and if it's an old facility, and we've done this before and we've done this successfully, is we can get into the equipment, and if there's enough residues left behind, we can actually do DNA. We extract DNA, generate nucleotide sequences, look at compare those sequences to yeast DNA that we have in our database. We've got about 22,000 different yeast strains that are cataloged in our cryogenic freezer. We can pull them out and access them anytime. We have genetic data on a lot of those. So we learn a lot about what the customer wants, and then we tell them, now that's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars just to do the work to find the strain. Then we're going to have to make that just specifically for you. And normally when we make yeast, we make 80 tons at a time. So if you're not ready to take 80 tons, then we got to make less than that. And that production run will cost you maybe $100 a pound. Whereas I can get you can look on our Firm Solutions website. There's probably not anything on there right now for more than $10 a pound. So that's the difference between, hey, just take we have chosen the 9 strains we sell to distilleries out of 22,000. We've already done that work. Like, don't recreate the wheel here. So those are some scenarios that we would be approached with, and then you multiply that by 100. We've been asked to make fermentations on the space station. We've been asked to, just all this different type of stuff. Does kombucha have alcohol in it? Depending on what day it is.
That's very cool. Just to kind of burrow in a little bit more on Joshua's question, there is, again, Scotsman, Scots raised, Scotch running in the veins. Obviously, for me, growing up in Scotland, learning about that product, the talk is yield, 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 and yeast is just there for yield. For you, with your expertise, do you die a little bit inside when you hear it only being pitched as yield? Do you firmly believe there's more to it on the flavor front? Well, I can say this. I've never seen a yeast strain that made a good yield that didn't also make good whiskey, okay? I have seen yeast strains that didn't make a good yield that made bad whiskey. So I would always we're going to always go for the best tasting whiskey we possibly can. But we also, because we have a choice to do that now, we can choose yeast that operate at higher temperatures, that ferment more quickly, that utilize more sugar, that are capable of surviving in higher concentrations of alcohol, that are capable of competing against contaminated organisms more readily. So there's a lot, and there's some yeast strains that we market that now that we've got, we went from 500-gallon batch to a 4,000-gallon batch to 20,000-gallon batches. We'll switch from strain A to strain B, and it's like you get 53 barrels a batch from one, and you get 61 out of another. So there are yield issues or yield differences. So when you look at that, hey, I can make an extra 10,000 barrels a year.
just by using that yeast strain, no extra grain or anything. How the hell do you account for that? You know, there's a lot of things where observations that we have, and it's like, if you do this, this happens. But why it's happening, that's kind of where as scientists, we try to go backwards and figure out, because, hey, man, how do I engineer this other strain to do that for me? Or, you know, and then you translate that across beer and in different areas, you know. Can't remember what the original question was, but back to the quality of the yeast strains.
Yeah.
You know, I think one thing anyone needs to really look at, one of the big problems that I see is, okay, I've got 3 different yeast strains. Let me put those into a mash, okay, or into a beer, basically. And if I'm going to be making a scotch, I'm going to be doing a lautered situation where I'm going to be able to taste that just like it's a beer, okay? And I can taste those 3, and I've done this a million times with classes, and I can say, in my head, I know everybody's going to pick number 4 out of 10. They're going to say that's the best. That's the best beer. But if I'm making an aged distillate in a barrel, I better be careful about picking at the beer stage. Now I take that to a clear distillate, and I start losing those nuances that I was very able to clearly pick out of the beer. Now everything's more complicated, and it's like, well, shit, all these are pretty good, but I do see little differences. Now throw that into a barrel and forget about it. So that's the other part of it is, and it's a little irritating when people are so dead set on making choices at the beer level or the new make level, when really the end result is what you're going after. So you can pitch out a yeast strain that does all these wonderful things because the beer tasted better or the beer smelled better, when it doesn't even matter when you get to the distillate. So I've said my piece. Don't get me riled up here, folks.
I've got a follow-up to that. Oftentimes when and quite often Jason and I will use Scotch whiskey as sort of signposts, and this will be one of those instances. So when I think about peated Scotch whiskeys, right, as those whiskeys age on, the peat ages out, right? You could taste some really old Lafroigs, and they're more fruit bombs than they are anything, and a lot of the peat is just a distant memory. And so I wonder, when it comes to yeast and considering yeasts, especially for flavor, is there an amount of time where yeast is doing more heavy lifting in that spirit, and does it age out? Or do you find it continues to age with the spirit, that it is detectable within that spirit?
Yeah, there's a million ways to go with the answer to that. But one example that I'll give that people can probably relate to would be esterification, esters. Esters are a group of chemicals that most, even just people who don't know anything about science, but if you've listened to bourbon, people talk, you've probably heard the word esters. Mm-hmm. Esters are the family of chemicals that impart the fruity notes, the nutmeg and the vanilla, and some of them come from the barrel. Some of them come from organic acids that are produced in the fermentation process that end up in the distillate. That organic acids condense with alcohols to form esters. And when you look at how esters change over time, so what's happening in the barrel, you've got what you start with. Then over time, you get extraction of the barrel contents that starts intermingling there. And there's this whole concoction of chemical reactions that are occurring. And one of those are these esterification reactions. And esters continue to get more and more complex over time. If you've ever seen the charts that talk about, ethyl acetate, isoamyl acetate, all these different esters, and it's got the little pictures of the strawberry or the pineapple or the bouquet of flowers on there, it gets more complicated over time. And so that's kind of what you see over time, is those esters begin to get more complex over time and go from one note fruity little hits to very complex bouquets of flavors. And then you intermingle that with things like the peat, smoke, or other influences of the grain or the type of barrel, new barrel versus used barrel. I mean, just lots of the proof off the still, the entry proof in the barrel. There's so many factors. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, cheers.
I was curious to bring you back a moment ago where you talk about where decisions are made. Given that you did put together Wilderness Trail and you built that and successfully so, how did you find yourself making the decisions along the way when you are predicting the future and you're predicting the flavors that you might want to put into bottle?
Well, a lot of the heavy lifting on the mechanics and how the plant operates, I'll give 100% of the credit to my business partner, Shane. He really, he's the number one guy in the world. I'll say it over and over. He is the number one ops guy in the world on building a distillery, operating a distillery, efficiency, sustainability, everything. He's really got a good handle on it. But also the forecasting. We started off making 1 barrel a day. We do 220 barrels a day now, 7 days a week. So going from, hey, I need 60 barrels and that'll last me for 3 months, to I need a full truckload of barrels every day. So you might as well bring 5 trucks, let them sit there in the parking lot. I'll have my truck driver move the empty ones and the full ones around, because we got to be ready to change them out at 2 a.m. So there's a lot of things that relate to forecasting that people don't understand, not just barrels, but grain. You just don't go to the local farmer and say, hey, I need 1.4 million bushels of corn and I'll be here to get the first 20 truckloads tomorrow. It takes planning. So and again, what about warehousing? We had to, at one point in time, we were building 3 24,000 barrel warehouses a year just to keep up with our production. So how do you stagger and have what's the site plan look like? How has it been approved? Or is there any gas lines that need to be moved? Is there any other, what's the utility situation over there? All these different infrastructure related things that have to be done way ahead of, you have to buy property before you can build a barrel warehouse. You have to have the plan approved by planning and zoning well ahead. You have to nowadays, there's a 12-month, 14-month lead time with Busick Construction that builds the barrel warehouses, as well as with Vendome that puts in the stills. So knowing 2 years from now, I need this, so I can let them know so that in 18 months, we can get that 6-month period of installation over with. So a lot of planning there.
Which is incredible, right? When you're talking about just those day-to-day decisions that are 18 months down the line. The way you're talking about separating the responsibilities with Shane here, if he's then focused on that, are you then free to think about flavor? Are you able to say, that's my remit and I'm going to think about this day in and day out and I'm going to be the one planning flavors 5 years from now?
Well, the thing about it is, there is a lot to be learned from what we already, we can already make whiskey like it's been made for hundreds of years, because we've been working exactly how do those distilleries make their whiskeys. You can start there. So we knew we were going to start out with great whiskey. We're just more rounding out the corners for little things like, production factors, and really, we don't know how our whiskey's going to taste until we got to that 4 to 5 to 6 year point. So there's a little bit of, even just considering our aging site versus, and no one's really got any record of aging whiskey there before. Our barrel's going to be all empty because it's too dry, too much wind, or are we going to see the proof go down and moisture coming in, and we're going to have a musty flavor? There are things relative to, same thing with curing tobacco here in Kentucky, which we've got a lot of experience with in the past. That affects the flavor of the end product. So maturation, a lot of people focus on making it, but there's a heck of a lot left up to Mother Nature, and we just happen to be in a excellent place for we believed we were when we began this, but you don't ever know till now. We're into 10-year products, so we have got a good handle. We've got and it's still on a hell of a good trajectory of flavor. And a lot of that, I think, is sweet mash process. It's just, it's a whole different type of a acidity level in the distillate. It just lends to a different type of drinkability. I'm really interested to see what this product is at 12 years, 15 years, and so on, relative to sweet or sour mash products.
So why the decision to go with sweet mash rather than sour mash?
Well, I mean, we didn't want to recreate the wheel by any means in terms of like just shoot in the dark at something totally new. But every distillery does a certain amount of sweet mash production. Once you shut down and you don't have any more back set when you start back up. So every distillery has a period of time where it's running a sweet mash. Now, how they manage those barrels in terms of their normal inventory, but there's no mark of death against sweet mash. It's always been kind of thought of as more difficult. And when you ask experts, why do you do a sour mash? And you get, first of all, I think it's important for listeners to understand it. It's amazing how much of a couch expert a lot of people are on different things. And you think, sour mash versus sweet mash, But I think it's important to understand sour mash. When you're mashing in the grains with the water in the mashing process, you're displacing 20 to 30% usually of the water with liquid left over from a previous distillation. Okay, that's the process of sour mashing. So you ask the sweet mash, in contrast, you're simply mixing all those grains with fresh water. We're trying to make a very consistent product. Consistency is one of our top goals. So water is more consistent than backset. Backset comes from different batches. Batches are different. We want to stay consistent. That's inconsistent. So that's our reason for doing it. But when you ask, so why does every other distillery on the whole bourbon trail do sour mash? You ask them, and the answers are very simple. There's a couple reasons relative to just day-to-day production. First of all, you're using that material to add the mash, which needs to be heated up. So there's a heat recovery involved. I got distillate coming off the still, or my back set coming off the still at 213 degrees. I incorporate that with my mash. I'm getting that heat back. Well, we have coils in our stillage tanks that we use to generate hot water, so we also recover heat at our distillery. Second reason is, at our distillery, we have to get rid of 100,000 gallons of stillage every day, 7 days a week. That's the biggest pain in the ass of managing the whole distillery, is getting that 16 or 17 semi-loads, whether there's 10 inches of snow on the ground or the cattle are eating grass or whatever, that's got to get out of there every day. So what about if I can incorporate 20 to 30% of that back into the process? That's a big advantage. So that's another reason. Now, the last reason, this is the one everybody hangs their hat on, is they'll say that sour mash makes my process more consistent.
Yeah, that's
and
what
as
I heard.
a bourbon enthusiast, the way that people process that is, well, I can think about it like sourdough bread. Okay, my grandma gave me a little piece of hers, and I'm starting that batch, and I'm taking a little bit of that previous batch and making the new batch with it. But the difference, grandma didn't run her piece of bread through the still at 213 degrees Fahrenheit and kill all the yeast in it. So that's one thing to be considered, is there's not a lot of living organisms left in the liquid from stillage because it's been heated so intensively. We've already done that. And it's actually a good way to get strains, Somebody give you their stillage. I can get it out of there, but it's kind of one of them, kills 99.9%. But I can still get the 0.1% that's in there. If I filter through enough of it, I'll find it eventually. So, but they say it makes it more consistent. And then when we peel back the onion and see that, okay, well, the old facilities, and you go to the old Scotch facilities too, and a lot of those people really welcome in more of that, what they consider to be what has evolved at their distillery, house bugs, I guess you could say. I've heard them called house bugs before, So if you have a little bit of pressure from contaminating organisms in your fermenter each and every time, if you acidify the mash, you reduce the potential for those contaminants to get you, okay? And in that respect, sour mashing is more consistent. But if I start off with a very clean facility because I built it avoiding every problem that we've been studying for the last 20 years that has caused the contamination issues at other facilities. And in the meantime, study contamination, because if there is a requirement for a particular flavor, then I want to incorporate that in very intentionally rather than just let's let it happen and hopefully it'll happen sometimes and we can figure out when it does and when it doesn't. So we're kind of looking for things like, again, now when I talked about yeast a minute ago, let me talk a little bit about bacteria. We have a collection of over 200,000 bacteria that we've isolated from distilleries all over the world. They're alive and well, sitting in our cryogenic freezers. And when we look at our distillery, for example, on a day-to-day basis, we're looking at lactic acid levels. Lactic acid is produced by bacteria, but not yeast. If our fermenters get over 0.3%, that's our indicator of, hey, we got bacteria in here. We're going to go in there. We're going to culture those bacteria, cryogenically store those. 6-8 years later, when we're pulling that whiskey out and we're saying, oh, there's the vanilla from the barrel. There's that nice strawberry I get from that strain. Mm-hmm. There's the rye spiciness. But what the hell is this? We can match it up to that bacteria sometimes. Now I'm in a situation where how about I'll create my own back set in this other little tank over here. I'm going to put this bacteria that makes that strawberry note. I'm going to let it grow, but then I'm going to heat kill it. And now I'm going to dump that in my fermenter instead of just putting back set from a previous batch. I'm creating my back set. So I'm still getting that acidification. And I'm still getting that donation of organic acids that are going to result in that ester I'm interested in. But it's just a more controlled way of doing it rather than just, hey, let's just put a little bit from the previous batch in. And you can transcend that across a lot of these industries. Dunder pits for rum, Scotch and the sour mashing, bourbon and sour mashing. I mean, it's really interesting. It's kind of the unknown frontier of this industry.
Interesting. Actually, you just brought up the question I was going to ask 30 minutes ago, which is in walking around Scotch distilleries where you meet stainless steel washback and Oregon pine washback, and those with steel say, well, it's cleaner, and those who use wood will say, well, it gives us the funk, the wax that we have in our make. Listening to you just now, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't sound like you're necessarily taking a side there, but you are saying each of those is correct in their supposition.
Well, anybody who's just got wooden fermenters is going to say they're great, But anybody who's got wooden and stainless steel, unless they're lying to you, is going to tell you the stainless steel is way the heck more easy to manage, And in the distilleries that we work with that do wood and stainless steel, they actually have to very specifically blend that in. I mean, it's almost like we got to get rid of this somehow, because it's so different. Not that it wouldn't stand on its own, but it's so different. It has to be meticulously blended in with the rest to make a unique product. So even though I've heard people say, and again, they're making great whiskey, so you can't argue with it. But the fact of the matter is, if you've got a lot of contamination, you're going to be missing out on a lot of yield, proof gallons of alcohol per bushel of grain. That's something we really have to look at on the business side of things. And if nobody can argue with, hey, I'll make an extra 10,000 bottles a month, and all I'm doing is just paying a little more attention to this one pipe here. It's hard to argue with that at the corporate level. And if those contaminants were so important to the flavor, then let's figure out a more controlled way of getting those in there rather than just letting it happen. Same thing with sour beer producers. Hey, let's put this beer in a barrel and see what happens. It turns out the most delicious ever, but then they can't recreate it, unless I come in there and get my beard. Oh, my beard got dipped into there. What do you know? Let me go to the bathroom. I got a Petri plate here in my back pocket. It's the oldest trick in the book.
That's why you keep the beard. That makes sense now. It's all.
Yeah. Some call it a beard. Some people call it a yeast inoculation tool.
So, Pat, in watching you create Wilderness Trail and then grow Wilderness Trail the way you're just describing here with an incredible set of forecasts, as you were going along, did you start to think about the next step, or were you fully engaged in, look, we're still just putting out whiskey here. We're doing the thing we want to do here, and we're going to show up and do this every day. I'll be perfectly transparent in my reason for asking you. For Josh and I creating Single Cask Nation, there was never an exit strategy. And then we got to a point we said, oh, actually, there might be room for a corporate partner here. We might need to think about the next step. And then we started talking about that, and then we enacted it. I'm just curious, given that Wilderness Trail made wonderful headlines for you, what your process looked like there.
Yeah, I've made this analogy before, but if you've ever watched The Never-Ending Story, where the knight is trying to get through the oracle and the little dwarf guy is like, "Why, see if he's going to make it," and he gets zapped. Like, if you enter this industry with impure thoughts, your ass is going to get zapped. So I think that's one thing. We got into this industry Shane's got a very robust family history. His grandmother retired from the Stitzel-Weller Distillery. His grandfather actually worked there too. I think they met at the Stitzel-Weller Distillery.
Wow.
But, he's got some good family history. But we've also got a lot of educational responsibilities to our clients with our Firm Solutions company. I've been a faculty member at Moonshine University now for over 10 years, almost 10 years. I'm an adjunct professor at the James Beam Institute at the University of Kentucky. So we've always been involved with educating our customers. And when we started Wilderness, we kind of probably started just as much to have an educational facility that we could show people how to make different types of booze than to really create a meaningful brand. Even though that was always in the back of our minds, it's just such a capital intensive process. Well, the other thing about Shane and I, we are entrepreneurs. We see opportunities, we act on opportunities. And when things come along, like, okay, we go from being the guys who distilleries call for yeast questions to the guys that distilleries call for any question possible. Okay. And what we started getting is a lot of people calling us about contract production. Hey, man, like when all the big guys started dropping everybody on contract production, dropping their storage, dropping their production, they're like, MGP can't make enough to support all these people. And at that time, a lot of bad press was being given to Indiana because a lot of brands that were saying, like Templeton's is a great example that was made very public, that had to put Indiana on the label. And now a lot of people were coming to Kentucky, from Indiana. So we were in a situation where we're getting all these phone calls of, hey, man, can you make 1,000 barrels? Can you make 500 barrels? We can only make like 200 barrels a year. But we thought, but by God, we can take on a bunch of this contract production and that help us capitalize. Because we didn't come in with any outside money. It's just two dudes ran this distillery. Shane and I, we had full ownership of that place and never got any outside capital outside of like pretty simple line of credit extensions that we were pouring all of our Firm Solutions money into building Wilderness Trail. So probably more than anything, that kind of got to the point of where we were literally dumping every penny that we made, not only in Wilderness, but also Firm Solutions to fund the growth that got us to the point to where now we can say, oh, hell yeah, I can make 1,000 barrels for you. In fact, I can make 50,000 barrels for you. So we were in a position of where we were gobbling up property around us. We went from 13-acre campus to 165-acre campus. I think we've got 24,000 barrel rick houses on the property now. But how do you fund that? is you got to have you can't fund that by I'll make whiskey today and sell it in 8 years. We were selling whiskey, but that capital coming in from the contract production was really crucial to to doing what we did without having to borrow tens of millions of dollars. And the other thing with Shane and I is we at that time at least we could jump in the car, take a 5-minute ride up to McDonald's and get an iced tea, and on the way back we would have had a board decision made. So we had no encumbrance. We didn't have any change orders, no bullshit. You just, hey, that wall, I want that over here instead of over there. I mean, we had total flexibility. I mean, Shane's like, hey, I need 25 bulldozers here, 50 mechanics, and he's like just directing. I mean, we were our own contractors for the most part, and Shane's orchestrating all this construction. And that's something else we see people get into hot water over is I want to spend, and you see it all the time. This facility, this is going to be $100 million distillery. This is going to be and it's just like, my God, the amount of money that can be spent in this industry. You can get really extravagant with the architecture and everything. We always really focused on, function over form. And that also usually leads to a pretty good structure and a pretty good form. If something works, it just organically a good, a comfortable structure to be in.
A hell of a ride, Pat.
Oh, man, I'm telling you. I just had a conversation with some people from my hometown that are doing, trying to, encourage youth and different things. And the American dream is well alive. Like we came out of the dirt and did what we did in the last 10 years. So it's just incredible. And we hope that people use our story as inspiration to, like you guys with your brand and different things. I mean, it's possible to do it. You just want to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. You're passionate about it and you're doing it because you love it and not necessarily because you're trying to make money. I mean, that part, you got to have money to have a business, but it should be something that's done out of passion. And we're bourbon enthusiasts way before we ever had a distillery.
Well said.
Yeah, yeah. I had two questions. The first one, you're describing what you do from a mash and a fermentation perspective. We haven't talked about distillation too much. That's okay. But you combined that with what Shane does and, just the sheer planning and the building of the rick houses and so forth. And the question that I have is when it comes to fermentation and distillation and then finally warehousing and maturation, because that can also be a bit of a flavor selector, right? Where you warehouse, what level it's on, how the wind comes through, etc. How much of a part does thoughts on maturation come into play when it comes to your bottlings? And do you think about that all the way back to mashing?
Well, I mean, you do your best. You just, like I said, you never really know. I mean, we didn't put all this stuff here because we thought it was a bad location. I'll put it that way. So, but you really would never know if there's any. I've seen distilleries that built on, beautiful location, but when you're there all year long, you realize that, oh man, when we were looking at this place in the fall, we didn't have all these torrential rains and like we do here in the spring that makes this area soggy, and why our equipment got flooded out and why our barrels smell musty because, we're in a flood zone. So there's different things that when you build there's a lot of stargazing going on, especially with new distilleries in terms of, oh my God, the wedding venue is going to be over here in the parking lot. When the visitors, when they pull in, the first thing they're going to see is our logo. And then they're like, yeah, well, where's the fucking gas line coming in here? Do you have enough water to fill a fermenter in less than 24 hours? Because if you got a garden hose running in here like you would a house, we need a water line this big around.
Yeah.
So, and then you look at gas, utility. Oh, we'll just bury a LP gas tank. It's like, okay, well, another $3 million. And the thing people don't understand about running a distillery is the boiler is supplying the steam that runs everything, heating the mash tank, running the stills. And if you don't have a good steady gas supply, the boiler shuts off, up and down, up and down. And that is not good consistency. And that's something that actually our head of maintenance is our former head of the boiler company that we buy our boilers from, just to let you know how important that role is. So anybody that uses our boilers through Firm Solutions, we're like, hey, man, you want to talk to this guy? You have to go through us first. But, yeah, man, so many different things. And, one thing that I'll point out that's really different about our process, we already talked about sweet mash, which is very different. And this also kind of gets to sustainability and a smart move on just energy consumption and utilities that also lends to a different flavor profile for our whiskeys. Is we look at each step of the process, what are we doing here? Okay. Grain selection, what are we doing here? We're trying to select really good grains. Do they look good? Do they taste good? Do they smell good? Do they make good distillate? Milling, how fine of particles do we need to get of that grain, to blend in the water? Cook temperatures. What temperature do we need to cook at? Well, what are we trying to do there? We're trying to convert starch into fermentable sugars. That occurs at about 175 to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Why does everybody in this whole industry cook at between 211 to 213? Probably because they've always done it that way. And when we started our distillery, we go to people who are already doing this and say, what temperature do you cook at? 211, 213. And we look at the literature, and it's like, well, what we want to happen happens at much lower temperatures. And also there's a lot of protein in here, and protein denatures at higher temperatures. Yeah. So if we release amino acids by denaturing protein, we might get more ethyl carbamate in the distillate. That's one of the many things that occurs. So why don't we save millions of dollars in utilities, have the lowest cook temperature in the industry, and we accomplish everything we want to accomplish, and it just happens to give our distillate a different flavor profile. It makes it more soft because we're not creating a bunch of extra congeners from the amino acids are readily taken up by yeast as nitrogen source. If they're left intact proteins, the yeast can't take them up. And things like arginine, that's an example of an amino acid that is a precursor to ethyl carbamate, which is regulated in any distillates going to the European Union, for example. So things like that, just common sense things that not only save us money, but give our distillate a very unique flavor and mouthfeel.
Which is one of the things I was going to comment on, sipping on our Single Cask Nation Wilderness Trail here. The mouthfeel is remarkable, something that we look for in every cask selection, but has it in spades in the example from your distillery.
One thing about our products is the two words that I tell people about our products. One of them is reliability. I will go to a tasting right now with the President of the United States or whoever it is, and I will go by any store that has wilderness, and my second word is confidence, and confidently pick up a bottle, and even if it's 4 years or whatever, it's going to be damn good. Yeah. So that's something that you're going to get, and the fact that this is a single barrel 4-year-old, I mean, that's another thing that people are like, I don't want to do a barrel pick if it's not at least 10 years old. I'm like, get your 10-year-old shit out and let me pour you some 4-year-old, and I'll guarantee you which one you're going to pick. So it is remarkable how well it's turned out. And something else that we did, at least early on, we're kind of experimenting with some different things now, but we used a barrel that the wood was air dried for an extended period of time. So we used 18 to 24 month air dried barrels rather than the more common 3 to 6 month. And what that does, the barrel people call that process deacidification. Mm-hmm. And that is specifically you're volatilizing tannic acid by letting those staves sit outside, and that takes away the tannins and makes it less tannic and less acrid at a young age. So that was one move that we made, because we drew a line in the sand and we said, hey, we're not going to release anything till it can be a bottled in bond. So we wanted it to taste really good at 4 to 5 years. Now that we're releasing 8 year, 10 year, some of our stuff goes into the less aged barrels. But back then we knew that we wanted it to just be fire at 4 to 5 years. And we still put a lot of our stuff in those barrels, but we do a combination now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that for me, that's music to my ears, because tannins, my palate has a really difficult time with tannins. Even, some bourbons that are 8+ years old, the tannins just blow out my palate, and it becomes too much for me. And you said something earlier which I thought was just really hit the mark, especially when it comes to this wilderness trail that we're sipping on, is that softness. And when Jason and I were going through some of these samples, there was softness throughout, but there was also a note in there that really surprised us, and I look for it every time, and I'm wondering if you could tell us where it came from. And it's this almost rosewater floral kind of note that I think balances out the rye spiciness in such a fucking cool way. This 4-year-old rye is doing so many things that a 12-year-old whiskey only wishes it could do. So where is that coming from?
Well, we get that in the rye a lot, and it's hard to say. I mean, when we started the distillery, we were only grinding like 820 pounds of grain a day. So it was really easy to know, all of our grain came from this farm. Now we grind 1 million pounds every 5 days. So it's a little different demographic on how we get our grain. But, that's also something that I kind of look at now this was distilled in 2020. So we were already running our big system. We were already up to big production by then. So it probably wasn't just the fact it was grain from a small geographical area. But, we've always tried to get local rye. We used exclusively Kentucky grown rye at one time. And we were one of the only distilleries that was using Kentucky grown rye. So, and we still try to get a lot of our rye in the state. So that's something else that, other distilleries even talk about getting their rye from other places. So that could be one thing that just puts a little extra note in it. But one thing about rye whiskey in general, I think our rye is the best damn rye on the planet. I mean, I'm biased for sure. But one thing that I really think it makes our rye great, and this is single barrel, so you can get everything, all the complexity, all the color, everything out of the barrel without diluting anything. But when you consider that a lot of ryes come out of the barrel in the 130s and are diluted to 80 or 90, I mean, where's the rye that is, our rye, the lowest proof we bottle at is 100 proof bottle in bond currently. And I'm surprised to see this at 113 proof. This is about as high, normally we're coming in. I bought a rye the other day that was barrel proof, and it was around 101. I've seen our single barrel ryes at 96 proof before, because we bottle them at 100 and 105. And sometimes it goes down a little. Sometimes I would say our average is 113 to 118. That would be going into the barrel at 110, but we go into the barrel at 100 to 105. So to see this at 113, that's high. But my point is, for that to be a 113 proof, that's fucking drinking like a pro.
Agreed.
Yeah, we'd say thank you, but you made it, so I guess we still say thank you.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what the yeast strain was on that.
Do you have a way of? You must have a way of.
Well, if we knew what the batch number was, we would. On our Wilderness Trail barrel picks, we always put the yeast strain. That's the only way. Because now most of our stuff's going to be small batch, so the chances it's going to have different yeast strains in there. So we don't put that on a normal bottle and bond release, but on a single barrel, we include the yeast strain. And that's just kind of another one of those things to where it's not like, oh, you're going to pick it based on the yeast strain, but it's just interesting to see. Sometimes we switch strains just because it's summertime and we need something to handle the temperatures a little better.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Production
makes good sense. Yep.
Drinks so well.
Right.
Yeah,
so, in all honesty, there's a shit ton that we could be talking about. But we try to keep our interviews to around an hour or so. And so one of the questions that we like to get out on, and please, Jason, if there was something you had in the chamber, please. Okay.
Time is against us.
Time is against us, as it always is. So what does the next 5 years look like? I mean, how many more warehouses are you building? How many more yeast strains are you adding to your arsenal? What do you have in the hopper?
Well, with Wilderness Trail, there's a lot of excitement just around our older releases. I mean, we've only done one very small 10-year release. So as we get into more inventory, seeing those releases get outside of Kentucky is kind of exciting for us. People ask us all the time, when are you guys going to do something new? And it's like, shit, man, we make 3 different mash recipes. And actually, we got 4 different mash recipes, including a 4-grain that we make now. But then you take into consideration single barrel, bottle and bond, then 50 milliliter, half pints. You got a million SKUs before you know it. So, we're kind of just playing it very traditionally on the distillery side. I mean, we're always looking for innovation. There's a lot of innovation we do at our distillery that's sort of behind the scenes. Like it's to make our distillery more efficient and more sustainable. So there's a lot of excitement there. And just really, I think understanding more time has to go by before we can pinpoint these organisms and how they influence, not only at our own distillery, but at the hundreds of other distilleries that we work with. I mean, we've got organisms going back 20 years with some distilleries. So seeing how that has changed over the years, and then we get the benefit of having all the data from all the distilleries. So any one distillery, they get their data back, and it's like, oh, wow, this is cool. But we get everybody's back. So we've got bioinformatics. We got computers running bioinformatics on DNA sequences that won't be finished in my lifetime. So we're all the time getting information about genetic sequences, how different yeasts are related to each other, what genes are turned on when the fermenter's running, when it's hot, when it's cool. Just so many different things. And we stay very busy, and we always have something cool going on with Firm Solutions on that side of things. We're all the time getting, we do everything from fermented beverages that make alcohol to non-alcoholic fermented beverages. I mean, we do sauerkraut, kimchi, fish sauce. I mean, we just did a Menma project for one guy who was trying to make fermented bamboo shoots that you put in the
Yeah,
Menma. So it's very similar to doing like sauerkraut fermentation. But anything to do with fermentation, which gives us a lot of ideas for over on the distilled spirit side. It's really super interesting how there's all this shit coming up in the future. I mean, too much stuff going on.
If you could find a way to get more minutes into an hour, we'd appreciate it, because I could continue this conversation with you indefinitely.
Well, we can have part 2. I'll do a 16-hour version of just me standing and talking. So we could probably do chapter 1 through 15, I'm sure.
Done. It's a deal.
Next time we're in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Come on down.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Great talking with you, and really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And hopefully our bands could play another show together. We'll wait for the next Drammening. We can play some rock and roll.
It all started with rock and roll in this podcast.
There you go. Well, cheers. Thanks again, Dr. Pat.
Yeah, you guys
cheers.
Take care.
Dr. Pat Heist, thanks again for taking the time out to talk with us and to committing to a part 2. I know there's so much we weren't able to discuss that it necessitates a part 2. So I'm looking forward to that. And hey, maybe it'll happen over yet another Wilderness Trail Single Cask Nation bottling.
Oh, there you go. Oh, I like the idea of that. Yeah, nice one.
And who knows? Maybe it'll happen after my band plays with his band yet again. A little more rock and roll into the world.
Well, I think connecting what we just heard there and to what Gabriel was writing in the email and what you and I were discussing about intentionality, hearing Pat talk about texture and them specifically building said texture through scientific practices.
Yeah.
I love it when you get to close the loop on why is this doing what it's doing? Why am I enjoying this the way that I am? And he goes, well, we built it that way. Oh, goddamn, well done.
It's great, and I love that they do focus on texture, and you use that word is so perfect. Intentionality, understanding that without good texture, and this is why you and I always refer to one another as being texture guys when it came to Single Cask Nation, that's it's like the dude's rug that ties the bow, right? That's what brings it all together. Right.
And delivers such flavors, right? The oils in there are flavor carriers and flavor deliverers. And it's about how you enjoy it, right? Yeah, we've said that a million times. Long-term listeners know exactly what I'm going to say next. But doing tastings where you have people meeting Single Cask Nation for the first time, and they come out of a 5 or 6 sample tasting and go, every single one of these had incredible texture in my mouth. It's like, well, thank you for noticing. That is by design. Yeah. That is a thing that we go looking for. So, yeah, fits with this wilderness trail so well. Texture through and through.
Yep. Inside and out. Love it. So you and I, Jason, have a fair bit of news to share, and I think it's so much so that it warrants bringing the Paperboy out.
Preach!
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy in trouble!
Launching Thursday, September 19th. Here in the United States of America on singlecasknation.com will be 4 new single cask strength, single malt Scotch whiskey bottlings.
Brilliant.
Right?
Brillianty.
And that's actually just the day after this episode drops. So this is a good reminder to those who are interested.
Checks notes. You are correct.
I wanted to go through the list of the 4 bottlings, and then I know you selected one of the whiskeys to highlight. I've selected another one to highlight. And
you did.
So let me go through the list, and then I'll hand it over to you. Is that cool?
Oh, lordy, lordy. Yes, please.
Lordy, lordy. Look who's 40. None of these whiskeys are 40. No, yeah, right. There's distant memory. Here we
Neither
go.
your 2 hosts.
Here you go. Let's subtract the 10 years that this Aberfeldy has, and we're back to 40. You and me. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order here. The first one we have on the docket is a 10-year-old from the Aberfeldy Distillery, a Highland distillery. It's for those of you that don't know Aberfeldy. A. It's the backbone to Doers. B, who's that redheaded musician that everybody loves, that all the girls love?
Ed Sheeran.
Ed Sheeran has an Aberfeldy tattoo. Did you know that?
I did.
So we have
I'm the one that put him on him.
Hey, go easy. So we have a 10-year-old. We have a 10-year-old Aberfeldy that's 7 years bourbon, 3 years in very active Spanish oak Oloroso hogshead. Bottled at 57.8% alcohol, 263 bottles, and that's going to be only $115 for that bottling. Followed then by a Thrusk, which some of you might say, well, a Thrusk, I haven't heard of that. Well, if you've ever read a word that looks like a Croisk, That's a thrusk.
Have you ever looked at a Scottish distillery and said, how do I pronounce that? There's a 1 in 10 chance it was a thrusk.
So we've bottled an 11-year-old, and similar to the Aberfeldy, this one spent an extra 3 years maturing in Spanish oak as well. So we seem to have leanings here with that Spanish oak.
'Tis the season.
56.7% alcohol, only 191 bottles out of that, and that's a hogshead. So,
oh wow!
I mean, if you think about a hogshead, when it's full, it can hold 340-ish bottles, and after 11 years, we've lost enough liquid that there's only 191 bottles out that cask. So that one will be 120. Not so bad for an 11-year-old cask strength single cask whiskey.
Ignore me, I'm just over here checking our internal production notes.
Is that accurate? Did I type in what does my spreadsheet say? The next one, this is one that I'm excited about all of them, but
it's true.
This is a distillery that I had brought to Single Cask Nation that you were, I don't know if I love these guys, I haven't had enough from them, so on and so forth. Anyway, it's a Ben Nevis, an 11-year-old Ben Nevis. And it's funny, I just mentioned that we seem to have leanings towards maturing whiskey and Spanish oak Oloroso, and this one's actually American oak Oloroso rather than Spanish oak. So you can get some different flavors coming out of that one. And that one is 56.2% alcohol, 263 bottles, again, compared to the 191. So one of these had a leaky cask. Again, that's an 11-year-old, so 120 a bottle on that. And then finally, we have an 8-year-old Williamson. So Williamson, as many people might know, is not the name of a Scotch whiskey distillery. It's the name of a distillate from a Scotch whiskey distillery. It's from a South Shore Isla distillery that's neither Lagavulin or Ardbeg. I'll let you all do the math. I don't know, you want to play Leapfrog later, you and me, Jason?
I was just about to ask you, have we released a Williamson? Because you get into a sticky wicket here where you say, I know we've released named Lafroig.
Yes.
And we've had unnamed other South Shore Isla owned by Diageo. Mm-hmm. But then I was thinking, we put out, it's just over my shoulder here, we put out our Laughing Frog woodcut. Mm-hmm. And that was unnamed
South Shore
material.
Distillery. Yes, exactly. Material.
The least sexy word ever uttered for whiskey. Material.
So interestingly, you know, that one that you just mentioned, what we called the Leapfrog, was a 28-year-old from this particular South Shore distillery. And with this, we went a bit more to your own leanings, which is young Isla. And this is an 8-year-old from a refill bourbon barrel, meaning that barrel was used at least 3 times. So you're getting a lot of good spirit character coming through with this one. And that's 57.8% alcohol, 250 bottles from that barrel, that's interesting. That's a barrel. So that's a lot of bottles coming from that barrel, given it's a smaller size compared to the hogshead. These numbers, they excite me.
Barrel science, maturation science, the inconsistencies that intrigue us during barrel selection.
Love it.
The Williamson, again, I echo what you just said. All 4 of them are our children. When we sit down and we select casks, we only select what we consider to be the best of the best, where all 4 would stand on their own 2 feet. Mm-hmm. that Williamson is going to disappear. Like that's easy peasy. It's an island refill bourbon.
Yeah.
The other three, I think the Spanish oak and the American oak is worth talking about just for a little minute, where I remember when I first found out that Highland Park, and I say found out, I didn't discover a secret. I just came to hear something I hadn't heard previously, which was Highland Park, in producing sherried whiskey, use a combination of American oak and Spanish oak sherry casks during maturation, right?
And European oak, which is different from American oak and Spanish oak. Yeah.
Right? And so I think, it's another one of those removing the layers of the onion where, as we just said a moment ago, a refill bourbon barrel, it's not first fill, it's not second fill, it's potentially a third or a fourth or a fifth use, however it's been used along the way. So they're not all created equal. To then walk into the world of sherry cask maturation and then start to pry out, American oak sherry will do something different than Spanish oak sherry? Like, yes. And as you and I have gone through more and more casks teasing out these differences, it's interesting to see the ways in which Spanish oak can take that role of robust, dark fruits, heavy, right? I think of our friends at Glenfarclas or Glendronach, right?
Yeah.
Where you think of really heavy sherry use. But then you bring in an American oak sherry, and I feel like the spirit gets a little bit extra room to breathe there.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And there's a bit less of the dark fruits and more of sometimes the grain coming through in the spirit, which brings me right around to the Etrusk here, which if you had told me that was an American oak sherry, I would 100% believe you.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's so cereal driven. And there's such a pleasing sweetness there that this Spanish oak, Oloroso in this instance, has really allowed the spirit to shine through. And I applaud the cask here for the work it has done.
I think as well, so A, I echo what you're saying, but B, I think it also talks to the quality of the Etrusk spirit.
Absolutely.
Right? It's
I couldn't agree more.
It's big, it's peppery, it can withstand, that like Spanish oak is soft, it's porous, like it allows spirit to sort of go in and act like a sponge to just take out all of the stuff from the wood, whether it's the sherry that was in there before or the char or just the natural compounds within the wood. But then you get a strong spirit like a Thrusk, and it's saying, oh, no, I'll be having some of that. But I'm still a Thrusk here. Like, I'm still a Thrusk. And so I applaud the two, the cask and the spirit.
I love the fact that on the nose, it opens with party balloons and fresh Chuck Taylors, which for me are two unmistakable notes, right? And that's your sherry presence. That's the sherry component of this maturation or this finish, this time in wood. But then there's the grain, then there's the nuts, right? Very much to your point, right? There's wood and spirit on the nose there.
Yep.
And they just kind of hum back and forth.
Man, I wish listeners could see your hand gestures as you're describing this.
Yeah, sweet on the palate. It's so funny, right? We always talk about the memories evoked by whiskey. Right now, just taking a sip, first sip of the day, first sip during this recording, and I'm transported back to my student flat in Aberdeen with Perry and me just pouring 1990s released whiskies back and forth.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
and I think it's the way in which the grain interacts with the sherry.
Yeah.
Like, it feels kind of old school. And it's a strange thing to say, but it tastes like I grew up thinking whiskey was meant to taste.
Oh, I like that. Oh, I like that a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's got a bit of heft. It's got a bit of oomph. It's quite rich. The alcohol is not a stranger in here. Like, it feels like a hefty dram, because it is a hefty dram.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love the interaction there.
That's great. How's the finish on that one?
Oh, I'm getting a kind of a little chocolatey note kind of floating around here. There is a note. There's actually a few notes in the tasting notes that I'm really proud of that we put together for the Thrusk. But there's one part on the palate where we say malted cereal that's been crushed by a bicycle tire.
Yes.
It's there. It's absolutely there. And if you sit with this whiskey and break down what that's communicating, it's absolutely there. Good rich mouthfeel.
Yep.
On another sip of it. Yep. It tastes like December in Aberdeen. Like, it's cold outside, we've got a nice warming dram inside. Like, that's phenomenal. I'm 100% there in my mind. But yeah, little waxy, still that cereal running through, a little bit of pepper, and then the chocolate covered raisins are in there as well.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's great.
Yeah. Oh, and then a little bit of coffee to the very back of the finish.
And so this is, again, I've got a different whiskey in my glass than you have in yours, but this is what I remember, or one of the things that I remember about the Thrusk, is that finish just keeps on going and develop.
Yeah.
And it's not the same every time, right? It sort of builds sip after sip. You discover more flavors there.
Yeah, I'm even getting a little bit of coffee ice cream just in the time I've been sitting here with nothing in my mouth and just focusing on the finish.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, rich, creamy, even in the finish.
There you
Yeah, cracking. How much did we say for this one? 120.
120. Yeah, and I think just really quickly before I start going over the notes on my whiskey, I don't think I mentioned the price on the Williamson. That one's going to be $110 a bottle. So apologies to those folks who were left hanging, wondering what the hell the price was going to be on that South Shore whiskey. So I have poured, and I sort of alluded to it as I was going through our list. I have poured the Ben Nevis. I discovered Ben Nevis, I don't know how many years ago, but it was love at first sip. And anytime we would see Ben Nevis on lists, I would say, we need a sample of that. And I'm so glad we found this one. So on the nose, it's funny. I look at the notes that we had written, and it's all there and then some. But let me talk about what I'm experiencing just now. So again, this is that American sherry oak, right? So
Exactly. American oak on this one. Yep.
yeah, American oak sherry. Yeah, American oak for the sherry cask, and that Ben Nevis is just right up there up front. Like, we talk about a strong spirit character, and Ben Nevis is one of the strongest. And I think it's good to point out too that this is a distillate from when Ben Nevis were using brewer's yeast. So you get this sort of rich, heavy sort of spirit. It's like boozy white peaches going on here. There's a lot of honey, a lot of nutty notes going on. I'm getting some oat cakes as well.
A terrific note.
And then some, that's kind of interesting. So some like dates, but maybe it's like if you jammed some boozy golden raisins into a dry pitted date. That's what you would have on the nose. Yeah. It's like a juiciness. Yeah, it's wild. It's sort of like vacillates between the two. So I'm just going to jam them together. Oh, man. Yeah, really nice. We've talked about it before, that nasal texture that you can sometimes get from a whiskey. And it's just like, there's no alcohol burn. I'm just jamming my big nose into this and just like breathing it all in. All right, I'm going in for the sip here.
Okay, Richard Patterson.
I hope I don't get sued. Does he have that patented or trademarked?
I was looking away from the video feed there, and I was like, hey, wait a second. Did Richard Patterson come on this call all of a sudden? Settle down.
So that was me just focusing on the texture. Like, it is absolutely mouth coating. It just takes over. It's like that scene in The Matrix where he takes the red pill and then he starts seeing things and he touches the mirror and then the mirror starts going over his body and just coats his whole body. That's what this liquid is doing to my mouth here. But
there you go. When
you go into the flavor, though, one of the more interesting notes, which I think may be yeast driven, is this like warm cider note, this almost like bright appley kind of thing going on.
I agree with you on that observation.
Very nutty. I'm hesitant to say marzipan because people say, oh, everybody says marzipan. But there's a little marzipan here. But mostly it's like that the almonds are toasted. It's like the slivered almonds. But if you focus a bit on the sweetness, you get that marzipan component coming through. Let me take another sip.
Gosh, yeah, it sounds like a fall dram you're describing here. Apple cider, toasted almonds,
apple pie, vanilla ice cream.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow. Oh, when you go pump, like this is such a fall dram. Holy shit. Go pick pumpkins and after a rainy day and you get those hail bays or bay hails. What am I trying to say?
Hay bales?
Hay bales, thank you. Hey, bale. Quick, bail me out of this one. It's that scent, that sort of like damp hay smell that has a flavor, right?
Which has always been for me, the Ben Nevis kind of signature.
Yeah. Oh,
and I think in early versions where I didn't necessarily like it, the dankness could be a turn-off. It could go too far.
Yeah.
And I think when the dankness is done well, I think it lends itself more to that kind of damp hay. I think it gives a little bit of weight to the fruitiness of it. And to your very point about yeast-driven notes, I think it's good to have that little bit of dank balancing out that fruit. And now I've got examples where some of my favorite Ben Nevises have actually taken the dank to extremes and just become wild funky monkeys, to the extreme that you actually gave me a Ben Nevis funky monkey that was too funky for you.
Yeah.
And I loved how wild it was. So there's always a lot to explore with Ben Nevis.
Yeah.
There's a reason that it's gaining steam in nerd circles. It also tastes delicious in Japanese whiskey bottles.
Moving on. The finish. So here's where the stone fruits come back, right? We were with boozy peaches on the nose. And now it's warmed apricots, it's honey, it's melted milk chocolate, not necessarily dark chocolate. However, the dark chocolate is now almost like a powdered dark chocolate comes in closer to the end.
Sometimes like a baker's chocolate.
Yeah, exactly. Some more of that oat cake coming in.
Oh, nice. So I'm sitting here still sipping on the very last of my Othrusk, And what's amazing is the flavors are so pronounced that, you know, sometimes you can lead the witness when you're drinking two different things, but you can taste the other person's notes.
Yes, 100%.
In the different thing.
Yeah.
That is not happening with this Thrusk.
Oh, lovely. There you go.
This Thrusk is still like, no, I am what I am. It's the Popeye dram.
And I am what I am, what I am, and I am what I am, and it's all that I am, and I am what I am.
So those are the four whiskeys. I mean,
Crackers. Yeah.
Aberfeldy, a Thrusk, which you tasted, Jason, the Ben Nevis, which I tasted, and then the Williamson. And we'll come back and we'll do some notes on all of these, maybe on the podcast, definitely on our YouTube channel.
Very, very much so. And just as you're saying there, for future tasting notes, we will have Jess on the next episode to talk about what you can expect to see in global markets. And there's a fair few crackers in amongst all of that as well. So we, just like we did today, we won't highlight all the things, but we will try to draw attention to some things. Here's a question for you, Joshua. Why select this Ben Nevis? The one that you've highlighted today.
Well, God, I fear that my answer just may be too pedestrian, straightforward, obvious, but to me, it's just great fucking Ben Nevis. I mean, here's the thing. I really like that the spirit character stays true regardless of it being, in this, first fill American Oak Oloroso. But what I like is that somehow what I feel are those yeast-driven notes are more pronounced in this one compared to other cask samples that we have had. And I think about the 2016 or 2017 change that Ben Nevis, maybe it was 2017, 2018 change, somewhere in that area, where Ben Nevis decided to move away from brewer's yeast and switched to distiller's yeast. And so we have this whiskey that is coming closer to the days when they decided to switch yeasts. And I just think about us 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the way we talk about Ardmore switching from direct fire distillation to, indirect heating. We're going to be having these same conversations about Ben Nevis. And for me, it's nice to have this sort of time capsule of here's something where they were still doing brewer's yeast. And what a great example to highlight why brewer's yeast was so cool.
Yeah, nice. I like that. I like that answer a lot.
And you, Jason, with your Thrusk?
It's twofold. One of which is definitely showing that spirit and simply selecting what we consider to be an excellent cask with wonderful balance there. But there's another component for me, which is I think we've brought, in recent memory, Dalyuin to the nation.
Okay.
And Dalyuin has been very well received. And we've brought Inchgour to the nation, and it has also been very well received. And I think hot on the heels of our fourth woodcut series, where we closed out that set of bottlings with a Thrusk that had some extended finishing in ex-Caroni rum cask. Having another opportunity to show a Thrusk to the nation is very exciting and very worthwhile, and something we said we were going to do when we launched the woodcut series. And so here comes a Thrusk. Get to know it, get to understand it, get to appreciate it. We'll start putting it out in different types of cask as well, so you can see how that spirit plays. But I think for a lot of people, a Thrusk is about to become a favourite, like it is a long-standing favourite of Elijah Ammon.
Dear Elijah.
And we do talk about the the types of people drawn to a Thrusk, but I'll leave the nation to read the truncated label note when the bottles come to their doorsteps.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, because it reminds me of the earliest conversations we had with distilleries like Arran and Kilhoman and Glen Murray, where we said, we're in love with your distillery spirit. We want to tell people about it. We want those who don't know about your distillery to know about you. And we're going to do it through our favorite casks. And that's been our remit from the beginning. We love this distillery. You should check it out. If you loved our bottling, if they have their own bottling too, buy their stuff too. Like, let's let our little ship help to raise the waters of other ships. If we could do that, then as an independent bottler, we've done a bit of our job here. And here we are 13 years, almost 14 years later, and you've described one of the reasons we got into independent bottling.
Yeah, the remit has not changed.
Yeah.
Come learn about this distillery.
Yep.
We think it's worth your time.
There you go.
Lovely.
Thanks again to Dr. Pat Heist and of course to Dr. James Foster for his lovely question, to Gabriel
Indeed.
and Emma from Balcones, of course to your good self, Jason.
Thank you.
To the listeners, to our nation members who also happen to be listeners, I raise whatever's left in my glass to you all.
I do the same. Cheers.
Cheers. Check. 2, 1, 2. Check. Okay, so it is down. All right.
All good?
All good.
Yep. Oh, sorry, I wasn't. Sorry. Now I'm ready.
And you are recording?
I just one elephanted all over myself. Yes. Yep. One elephant, two elephant, three elephant, four elephant, five elephant.
Whew. You got a little elephant on your...
It's all the way down my shirt. Yeah. Try to get it back in.
It's like a pearl elephant. Easy.
Pearl elephants on parade.